1967, California, Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. Brigadier General Robert R. Scott, a senior aviation officer in the Marine Corps and Chief of Staff of the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, vanished from his office on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday night. Not killed in action, not reassigned, not retired. He disappeared. His uniform was still hanging on the rack. His briefcase sat on top of the third drawer on the right side of his desk, containing an unsigned sitrep about an unauthorized aerial contact incident that had occurred 4 days earlier over the 29 Palms training area. There was still half a cup of cold black coffee in his mug, a faint ring of light brown residue clinging to the inside. His car, a military green Plymouth, was parked in the headquarters lot, engine cold, gas tank full, the key still in the ignition. Base MPs found it at 3:40 a.m. during a patrol the following morning. One of the windows was half open, and on the front seat lay an open pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes and a lighter. General Scott smoked Luckies. Anyone who had ever sat in a meeting with him knew that. The lighter was a brass Zippo, heavily worn, engraved with the designation of the squadron he had served with during the Korean War. No one saw him leave. There were no witnesses, no surveillance footage. The base security systems of that era relied on patrols and sign-in logs. His wife called the duty desk at 7 o'clock the next morning because he hadn't phoned her by 10 o'clock the night before, as he always did. It was their routine, a habit they had kept for 19 years. General Scott was a man of near-obsessive punctuality. His subordinates privately called him Colonel Timetable, even though he was already a general officer. He was never late, never absent, never broke a single rule he set for himself. Agents from the Naval Investigative Service arrived at Pendleton 3 days later. They tore through his office, his quarters, his personal correspondence, phone records, and every mission file from the past 6 months. They interviewed over 200 officers and enlisted personnel. The vast majority gave eerily consistent answers. "I don't know, sir. Everything was normal that night, sir. I didn't notice anything unusual, sir." Only one private, a PFC named Miller, mentioned anything out of the ordinary. He said that on the night of the 17th, the night General Scott disappeared, at approximately 11:40 p.m., he saw the general's vehicle near a maintenance corridor on the east side of the base. Miller had been on rear area patrol. He said the car was parked at the end of the corridor, near an old hangar. The headlights were off, but there was a silhouette inside. He assumed the general was waiting for someone or reviewing documents, and didn't approach. That was Miller's exact statement, recorded in interview report number 47 of the Naval Investigative Service. The report was later removed from the file. It disappeared from the folder, just like General Scott himself. 6 weeks later, the case was officially filed as unauthorized absence, then downgraded to missing status, and finally marked presumed dead in 1973. But that's not what I'm here to talk about tonight. What I'm going to tell you is what General Scott was doing before he disappeared, and what we saw in that goddamn range after he was gone. My name is Harper. I served in the Marine Corps from 1987 to 2011, gunnery sergeant. Most of my time was spent in a scout sniper platoon. I was part of Operation Desert Storm, did 2 rotations in Fallujah, and I've still got 3 pieces of Iraqi shrapnel lodged in my knee. Every time the weather turns, it feels like someone's jamming a screwdriver in there and twisting. I've seen a lot of things that don't make sense, some done by people, some not. But what happened in the northwest corner of Pendleton in the spring of 2012, it took me 8 years to even convince myself to talk about it. Not because I'm afraid people will think I'm crazy. I spent 24 years in the Marine Corps. Nobody says that to my face. It's because I'm afraid that if I say it out loud, something might realize I still remember. It was March 14, 2012. Our platoon had just rotated back from Afghanistan and was stationed at Pendleton for a 6-month reset and retraining cycle. The base covers over 125,000 acres, stretching from the coastline of San Diego County deep into the Santa Ana Mountains. It's the largest Marine Corps base in the continental United States, and the terrain is complicated enough to get you lost 3 times over. Along the coast, there are fog-soaked flats and scrub-covered cliffs. Inland, you've got scorched hills and dry riverbeds. Deeper into the mountains, there are vast undeveloped zones designated for live fire and maneuver training. Some areas on the map are marked restricted access, coordination authority above division level. I've been into those areas twice. Both times, there was something off about them. Not fear exactly, more like the feeling you get when you step into a house that's been empty for years, where the air makes your skin tighten just a little. The weather that afternoon, March 14th, was bad. A heavy marine layer rolled in from the Pacific, pushing about 6 miles inland and wrapping the entire western half of the base in thick gray-white fog. Visibility in most areas was under 200 yards, and in some low-lying spots, less than 50. Temperature was around 55 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity close to 100%. The air carried the smell of salt and rotting seaweed, mixed with sagebrush and dry dust from inland, a strange combination that made your nose itch. We were assigned a night live fire exercise. Nothing special on paper. Squad-level night shooting qualification at Range Juliet in the northwest sector of the base. We were using M40A5 sniper rifles and M110 semi-automatic sniper systems, engaging fixed targets at 400, 600, and 800 yards. Standard Marine Corps Scout sniper qualification. Routine stuff. Except for one detail, the location of Range Juliet. It sat right next to one of the most remote restricted zones on base. On the map, that area didn't have a name, just a designation, X-17. In official base documentation, X-17 was described as an abandoned aviation weapons testing site. Supposedly, the Navy had tested some kind of airborne weapons system there back in the 1960s. The project was terminated, the equipment removed, and the site left to decay. It sounded reasonable enough. The base was full of abandoned facilities. Coastal artillery positions from World War II, early Cold War radar stations. Nothing unusual about that, but one detail stuck with me. On the perimeter fence around X-17, the warning signs weren't the standard military restricted area placards. They were red, a type I'd never seen anywhere else. Beneath the usual warning text was a smaller line. Restricted under authority of Section 142 of the Atomic Energy Act of 1954. The Atomic Energy Act of 1954. That meant nuclear material had once been involved. I'm not a physicist. I'm not an intelligence analyst. I'm just an old warfighter who knows when to keep his mouth shut and when to keep his eyes open. The snipers in my platoon didn't expect anything special from the mission. Night qualification is routine, especially during a reset cycle. Command needs to keep Marines busy so they don't get restless. Our platoon commander was Lieutenant Groves, a tall, wiry guy from Missouri with a drawn-out southern accent. 2 Iraq deployments. Steady to the point of seeming slow, but every decision he made in combat was dead right. I was the platoon sergeant. We had 12 scout snipers, split into 4 fire teams. That night, Team 1 and Team 2 went out, along with me, Lieutenant Groves, and a comms guy named Sanchez. 9 of us in total. At 5:30 p.m., we drew our weapons and ammunition from the armory and loaded up 2 7-ton trucks. I carried an M40A5, Remington 700 Action, Schmidt and Bender optic, 308 caliber. There was a cheek pad taped to the stock that I'd been using for 7 years, soaked through with my sweat and beard oil. Each man was issued 40 rounds of live ammo, plus 2 magazines of rounds for zeroing night optics. Sanchez carried an N/PSC-5 satellite comms terminal and 2 PRC-117F radios, standard loadout. Night vision gear was PVS-14 monoculars, along with N/PVS-22 clip-on night sights mounted to each sniper rifle. For a night qualification, the gear was more than solid. We rolled out of the barracks at 1800, heading northwest along the gravel roads inside the base. By then, the marine layer had thickened. The headlights pushed forward into the fog like 2 solid white walls, visibility maybe 30 yards at best. The driver was a PFC named Keller, a clean-shaven kid from Wisconsin who chewed gum nonstop behind the wheel. He slowed the truck and kept it centered on the road, careful in the low visibility. The truck was quiet. Guys who've just come back from a combat zone all share the same habit. You don't talk loud while you're moving. It's not about discipline. It's instinct. Drive enough roads in Iraq or Afghanistan, and you learn to keep your mouth shut and let your eyes do the work. The atmosphere wasn't tense, exactly, but there was a kind of low-level alertness, like a rubber band stretched tight but not quite snapping. After about 40 minutes, we reached Range Juliet. It was an open valley. To the north, a low ridge line. To the south, a gradual slope dropping into scrub-covered wasteland. The targets had already been set up during the day by range personnel, 400 yards was a set of steel torso targets, 600 yards the same, and at 800 yards, a 1-meter square steel plate. Everything was set exactly to spec, but when I got out and checked the firing line, I noticed something. About 200 yards beyond the 800-yard target, you hit the perimeter fence of X-17. I stood at the firing position and scanned the range through my spotting scope. The 400-yard targets were clear. The 600s were a little blurred by the fog but still visible. The 800-yard plate was almost completely swallowed, just a faint glow where it reflected light back. But what caught my attention was behind it. The fence line of X-17 had a strange visual effect in the fog. Not because of the fence itself, but because the fog on the other side didn't move the same way. It's hard to describe. Imagine a river with mist drifting over the surface. The water flows one way, and the mist follows it. That night, the wind was coming from the west, off the ocean, so the fog should have been moving inland, west to east. But on the other side of that fence, the fog was rolling the opposite direction, east to west. Like something unseen was stirring it from inside. I didn't think much of it at the time. I chalked it up to weird airflow from the terrain. Valleys can do that, create odd wind patterns. Nothing supernatural about it. I pulled my eye off the scope and went back to setting up the firing line with Lieutenant Groves. First round of fire started at 1920. That's the first part of what I'm going to tell you. But before I go any further, there's something I need to say about fog, about what we see in it, and about the boundary of reality itself. A boundary that's thinner than most people are willing to admit. In 24 years in the Marine Corps, I've been all over the world. I've seen the sky over the Persian Gulf turned orange by burning oil fields. I've seen the near black blue of the sky over the Hindu Kush. I've seen morning fog rise out of rotting vegetation in the jungles of the Philippines, carrying that sweet, sick smell. And every now and then, in places like that, at a certain hour, under a certain light, in a certain kind of silence, I've felt the same thing. The world under my feet is thinner than it should be. Not metaphorically, literally. Like a layer of plastic wrap stretched tight. You press your hand against it, and you can feel something pushing back from the other side. You can't see it. You don't know its shape, its temperature, or what it wants. But you feel it, because at your fingertips, there's an uneven pressure pushing against you. It's not wind, not temperature, not anything you can explain with physics or weather. It's something older, something instinctive. A signal buried deep in your brain, flickering in a place older than language, telling you, this side is our world. That side isn't. Most people never feel that membrane. Most of the time, they're too busy thinking about everything else. Mortgages, work, dinner, their kids' school meetings, when to change the oil in the car. Those things take up all their attention, like a light that's too bright to let you see the darkness beyond it. But put someone somewhere remote enough, quiet enough, old enough, and if that light dims, even for a second, you start to feel it. You notice things moving at the edge of your vision. Sounds hovering just outside the range you can clearly hear. A faint prickling across your skin that isn't cold, and isn't warmth. Military operations have a way of putting people in places like that. Ranges, training zones, forward operating bases. The edges of civilization, places where human presence is thin. Stay in places like that long enough, and you start noticing things you'd never notice in normal life. You see movement through night vision that doesn't move the way anything should. You hear patterns in radio silence that shouldn't exist. You smell things in the dark before dawn that don't belong to any known source. And then you tell yourself it's nothing. Because if you don't, then you have to consider the alternative, that there's something on the other side of the membrane. And it's looking back. The first time I ever thought that was in 1989 Panama. Jungle Edge, don't remember exactly where. I was a young corporal back then, full of energy, not a lot of sense. We were set up on an observation post along a dirt road, watching what was believed to be a drug trafficking route. Around 0300, I picked up a heat signature through an /PVS-4 night vision scope at about 300 yards, right at the tree line. It wasn't a person, wasn't an animal, at least not any animal I recognized. The heat signature was wrong. A human's thermal profile radiates outward from the core, torso hottest, limbs less so, head bright from blood flow. This thing was uniform, completely uniform, from top to bottom, like a cylinder of constant temperature standing upright at the edge of the trees. It stayed there for about 40 seconds. Then it moved. No acceleration, no transition. It didn't walk, didn't run, didn't jump. It just shifted. From one position to another about 20 yards to the left. No movement in between. No crossing of space. Just there then there. I lowered the scope and looked with my naked eye. Nothing. Raised the scope again. It was gone. The next morning, I told my squad leader about what I'd seen. He was a Vietnam vet. After listening, he went quiet for about 10 seconds, then said something I've never forgotten. Harper, some things, you see them. But don't say them out loud. Command doesn't like hearing that kind of thing. What they want to hear is observed 4 armed personnel moving north, not observed a uniform heat source displacing in a way that violates the laws of physics. You understand me? I understood. From that point on, I learned to keep my mouth shut. 23 years later, at Range Juliet in Camp Pendleton, I thought of that again. At 7:20 p.m., the first round of fire began. The shooter for Team 1 was Corporal Kowalski, a Polish kid out of Chicago's South Side, one of the top 3 marksmen in the battalion. He was prone about 5 yards to my left, M40A5 bipod planted solid in the sandbag, muzzle lined up on the 400-yard steel. Lieutenant Groves stood behind him with a laser rangefinder and wind meter. I was slightly behind, and to his right, spotting through the scope and calling corrections. The rest of the team was spread out along the line, some assisting with observation, others handling safety. Sanchez was about 15 yards behind us, crouched over the satellite terminal, listening to routine battalion traffic through his headset. The weather hadn't improved. If anything, the fog had gotten worse. Visibility dropped to around 150 yards. The 400-yard targets were just blurry shapes in the scope, like ghosts behind frosted glass. But the night optics helped. The PVS-22 could cut through moisture better than visible light. Still hazy, but you could pick up thermal contrast. The 400-yard targets had reflective thermal tape, showing up as faint green patches, enough to aim. Kowalski fired the first shot. The M40A5 cracked across the valley. The sound bounced off the ridgeline to the north, then the slope to the south, before getting swallowed by the fog. A clean metallic ping. Hit. Impact was high right, about 3 inches off the edge. I called it. Down left 2 MOA. He adjusted, sent the second round, dead center. The next 20 minutes followed the standard qualification rhythm. 5 for 5 at 400. Then 600 yards, 4 hits, 1 push left by a sudden crosswind. Then he rotated out, and Private First Class Rodriguez from Team 2 took his place. Everything was normal. If you've never done night live fire, it's hard to explain what normal feels like. It's not calm, not relaxed. It's a kind of hyper-focus repetition. Your brain splits into separate modules, one calculating distance and wind, one tracking your breathing and heartbeat, one feeling the trigger break, one watching the sight picture. All of them running at once, drowning out anything that doesn't matter. That's why snipers miss things around them. Not because nothing's happening, but because there's no bandwidth left to process it. So during the first round, no one noticed what was happening above the ridgeline to the north. I only realized it later, going back over my observation log. I logged every shot, time, impact, environmental conditions. Every 10 minutes, wind speed, direction, visibility. 1920, wind 270 degrees, 5 knots. Visibility 150 yards. 1930, wind 265 degrees, 6 knots, visibility 140 yards. 1940, wind variable, 2 knots, visibility 200 yards. Variable wind, sudden drop in speed, visibility improving. Meteorologically? Possible. Fog hitting terrain can do that, disrupt airflow, thin out temporarily. But there was something else in my log. Something I wrote down, crossed out, then circled. 1942, light observed above northern ridgeline. Unknown origin. Duration approximate 4 seconds. I crossed it out because I couldn't explain it. I circled it because I knew I hadn't imagined it. It was a light, suspended in the fog about 50 feet above the ridgeline. Not a spotlight. Not a vehicle light. Not anything I'd ever seen in military use. The color wasn't white, yellow, or red, it was something else. If I had to describe it, somewhere between deep amber and burnt orange, but with a cold tone that didn't belong, like a flame frozen in place. It had no beam, no source point, no direction, just a uniform glow, soft-edged, like the fog itself was emitting light. It lasted about 4 seconds, then it went out, not faded, not flickered, gone, like someone flipped a switch. At the time, I was spotting for Rodriguez's 600-yard shots. My right eye was glued to the scope, left eye open for peripheral awareness. The light appeared at the edge of my left eye vision. I turned instinctively. Too late. It was already gone. I went back to the scope, kept logging impacts. My brain tagged it as irrelevant, noise to be ignored during qualification. It wasn't until 8:16 p.m. that I realized it wasn't noise. At 8 p.m., the first round of qualification ended. Kowalski and Rodriguez both passed, solid scores. Lieutenant Groves called a 15-minute break before starting the second phase. The next phase was moving target engagement. Range control would run a thermal target on a remote track, right to left at about 5 miles per hour. The shooter had to engage while it was in motion. Harder, but nothing these guys couldn't handle. During the break, Groves and I stepped behind the line and lit cigarettes. The fog had thinned a bit, visibility up to maybe 250 yards. The moon broke through a gap in the clouds, casting a cold white glow across the range. The marine layer looked like white silk laid over the ground, slowly rolling, filling low spots, curling around brush like something alive, testing the terrain. "You see that light up north?" I asked. He took a drag, the ember lighting part of his face. Thought about it. Shook his head. "No." "What kind of light?" "Hard to say. Orange. Above the ridge." "Just a few seconds." He glanced north. The ridgeline looked strange under the moon, clear outline below, completely swallowed by fog above, like a hard boundary between two layers. Above that line, nothing but flat gray-white. "Probably a patrol vehicle," he said. "There's a maintenance road up there. Runs out toward X-17. MPs drive it sometimes." It made sense. Patrol vehicles on base use amber warning lights. If one was moving along the far side of the ridge, the light could scatter through the fog like that. I accepted it, crushed the cigarette, went back to the line. 8:16 p.m. Second round ready. Range control confirmed over the radio. Moving target system active. The track vehicle rolled out from a bunker on the right side of the range, carrying a human-shaped thermal target. It moved left along the rail at a steady pace. The heat signature simulator mimicked human body temperature distribution. On night vision, it looked almost identical to a real person. Standard Marine Corps sniper training gear. I'd seen it 100 times. Rodriguez lay prone on the mat, the muzzle of his M110 tracking the moving target in a smooth, controlled arc. I watched through the spotting scope. 400 yards. Target speed 5.2 miles per hour. Wind hold, 0.3 mils. His breathing was steady, his trigger finger taking up pressure evenly. Then I saw it. Behind the moving target, in that stretch between the range boundary and the X-17 fence, something took shape in the fog. It wasn't a target. It was a person. No, it wasn't a person. I stared at it through the scope, and it took my brain a full 2 seconds to make the jump from seeing to understanding. Those were the longest 2 seconds of my life. In the first second, my visual cortex did its job, turned light into signal. In the second, my mind tried to match that signal to something it knew. It failed. The outline had the basic proportions of a human, head, torso, limbs. But it wasn't standing, walking, or moving in any way a human body can. It was suspended. Its feet, or where its feet should have been, hung about 6 inches above the ground. The fog didn't touch it. Or more accurately, the fog stopped about a foot away from its surface, forming a clean void shaped exactly like its body. Like its presence pushed the fog away. It had no color, and it wasn't transparent. I could see it, but I couldn't say what color I was seeing. If I had to force it into something familiar, my brain picked a dark, metallic gray, like polished, oxidized lead. But I knew that wasn't right. It was a color that shouldn't exist. Its head, if that was its head, had no face. Not covered, not blurred, just none. That part of it was smooth, continuous, featureless. No eyes, no mouth, no structure at all, like a sculpture that had never been finished. It hovered there, facing our firing line, 450 yards out. Moonlight hit its surface. No reflection. Rodriguez squeezed the trigger. The M110 cracked. The moving target rang, clean hit, center mass, slightly left. Perfect shot. I didn't take my eyes off the thing. The instant the shot broke, its head moved. Not like a human turns its head. No motion, no transition. One frame, it was facing the range. Next frame, it was facing us. Something cold climbed up my spine, all the way into the back of my skull. Not fear, physical reaction. Adrenaline dumping straight into my bloodstream. My fingers locked on the focus knob. My breathing stopped. My heart rate spiked past 120. Spotter, impact, Rodriguez called. I didn't answer. Staff Sergeant? Impact? I opened my mouth. What came out didn't sound like my voice. Hold on. Through the scope, it was still there. That faceless head pointed straight at us. I couldn't say it was looking. We use eyes for that. It didn't have any. But I felt it. A weight. A pressure. Something reaching across 400 yards and pressing into me. My forehead, right between my eyes, started to tingle. Then it went cold. Then it hurt. Like something sharp was slowly pushing in. I jerked my head up from the scope. With the naked eye, nothing. Just fog, moonlight, and the faint line of the fence. I dropped back onto the scope. It was still there. Closer. Not moving toward me, just closer. In the instant I looked away, it had changed position. Now maybe 300 yards out, right beside the moving target track. The moonlight outlined that blank, featureless head perfectly. Then it made a sound. No, the sound appeared. Sound is supposed to travel. Air, vibration, ears, that's how it works. This didn't. It skipped all of that. It just existed inside my head. A low-frequency hum. About 20 hertz. Right at the edge of human hearing. You don't hear it so much as feel it. My chest started vibrating. My teeth ached. My inner ear went haywire, like I was tilting sideways even though I was flat on the ground. Then came the smell. It reached us from the range. 400 yards. Through thick fog. Not carried by wind. The wind had died completely. Not a blade of grass moved. The smell came on its own. Directional. Intentional. Like something crawling through the air. It was layered. At the base, sharp ozone. Like air after a high-voltage discharge. Under that, a sweet, wet rot. Not dead flesh, more like vegetation left too long in water, mixed with soil. And over it, something else. Something I have never smelled anywhere. The only way I can describe it is this. Cold metal burning. Your brain shouldn't be able to process cold and burning at the same time. But it did. I wasn't the only one. Sanchez shot to his feet so fast he knocked his PRC-117F off his lap. His face was pale in the moonlight, eyes wide, lips moving with no sound. Keller, the kid with the gum, started vomiting. Dropped to a knee, hands on his legs, everything coming up onto the dirt. Kowalski stayed prone behind his rifle, but his hands were shaking so badly the reticle was bouncing all over the target. Rodriguez had already broken position, half-crouched, one hand clamped over his ear, the other reaching for his M9. Lieutenant Groves was the only one still holding it together. Barely. He stood there with the rangefinder aimed downrange, the other hand pressed to his throat mic, jaw locked tight. Later I found out what his device was reading, numbers jumping wildly. 400, 800, 200, 1200. No pattern. Like the laser was hitting something that couldn't stay in one place. I forced myself back onto the scope. It was closer now. 200 yards. And it wasn't alone. Two more shapes had appeared beside it. Same height. Same distance off the ground. Three of them, perfectly aligned, facing us. The fog behind them had frozen. Not slowed. Stopped. Like a wall. Moonlight hit from behind. There should have been shadows, highlights. Nothing. They absorbed the light. Like holes in space. Then the one in the center moved. It raised its right arm. No joints. No motion. One frame. Arm at its side. Next frame. Extended forward. Its hand, if that was a hand, pointed. Not at us. North. Toward the ridgeline. Toward X-17. Then they were gone. All three. No fade. No movement. No transition. One frame there. Next frame. Nothing. The fog rushed back into the space they'd occupied, and as it filled in, there was a soft sound, like a cork pulled from a bottle. The hum stopped. The smell vanished. The wind came back. Fog rolled again, slow and lazy. Moonlight settled over the range like nothing had happened, lighting the moving track, the 800-yard plate, the rusted fence of X-17. Everything normal again. Except us. Rodriguez still had his hand on his pistol, knuckles white. Keller was on his knees, the stink of vomit spreading across the firing line. Kowalski had his face buried in his arms, shoulders shaking. Sanchez stood frozen, staring at the range, tears running down his face like he didn't even know they were there. Lieutenant Groves lowered the rangefinder. His throat moved once. My forehead still hurt. That pain wasn't imaginary. I reached up and touched it. Skin felt normal. No wound, no swelling. But deep underneath, there was a dull, persistent ache, like the after-pain from a needle puncture. It stayed with me for the next 8 weeks, fading a little each day but never fully disappearing. Even now, as I write this, if I press the center of my forehead, I can still feel a faint trace of it. At 8:23 p.m., Lieutenant Groves ordered the training terminated and an immediate withdrawal. We didn't pack anything. Rifles, optics, rangefinders, comms gear. We left it all where it was. The 9 of us piled into a single 7-ton truck. Keller wasn't fit to drive, so Groves took the wheel himself. The truck tore down the gravel road at a dangerous speed. The headlights barely lit 20 yards ahead through the fog, but he didn't slow down. He drove like something was chasing us. No one spoke inside the truck. Not because we didn't want to. Because we couldn't. Every mouth moved. Every throat tried to form sound. But whatever we were trying to say died before it reached our lips, like something was pulling the words out of the air. Later, Sanchez told me he had tried to say the simplest thing, faster, but his tongue felt frozen, completely unresponsive. The words just looped in his head, over and over, like a broken record. When we hit the front gate, the MP on duty nearly jumped out of his skin. Groves drove straight up to Battalion HQ, killed the engine, let go of the wheel, then dropped his head forward until his forehead rested against the center of the steering wheel. He stayed like that for about 5 minutes. His shoulders trembled, barely noticeable. Not crying. Something deeper. The body trying to discharge stress after being pushed past its limits. I stepped out of the truck. My legs were shaking, knees soft as rubber. I stood on the concrete and looked up. The fog over Pendleton was thinner than at the range. A few stars showed through breaks in the clouds. Orion's belt was clear. Sirius burned cold and blue in the southeast. They looked exactly the same as always. Distant, indifferent, eternal. Standing there, staring at them, I had a thought that scared me more than anything that had just happened. Between those stars, in all that dark space we call empty, what if something like that fog exists out there too? What if shapes form inside it, hovering inches above some other world, faceless, colorless, carrying that same cold, burning metal smell? We think space is empty. We think it's nothing. But what if it isn't? What if it's just another kind of fog? Back in the barracks, Lieutenant Groves made a call to the duty officer. I don't know what was said, but about 40 minutes later, 2 Humvees rolled in, 8 MPs and 2 men in civilian clothes. The 2 didn't show ID, didn't give names. They pulled Groves aside and talked to him for about 15 minutes. When he came back, his expression was something I'd never seen on him before. Not fear, not anger, empty. He assembled us and, in a flat, emotionless voice, delivered the official explanation. During training, a localized gas explosion caused by unburned propellant had produced a temporary hallucinogenic smoke. Personnel exposed experienced varying degrees of visual and auditory disturbance. All affected individuals would undergo 72 hours of medical observation with no outside contact. All weapons, equipment, and observation logs would be confiscated for safety evaluation. Gas explosion. Hallucinogenic smoke. I wanted to laugh. My face wouldn't do it. No one objected. Not because we believed it, but because we knew what objecting meant. It meant rejecting the official version. It meant insisting what we saw was real. It meant putting yourself in line to be labeled unstable. For a Marine, that's worse than being physically broken. A physical injury is honorable. Mental instability means your own mind betrayed you. So we all nodded. We all signed. We all put our names on a document that redefined what we saw as hallucinations caused by gas exposure. After 72 hours, we were reassigned. Kowalski to Camp Lejeune. Rodriguez to Okinawa. Keller discharged 6 weeks later, medical. Non-combat-related PTSD. Sanchez stayed at Pendleton, but refused to enter FOG during any night training after that. His staff NCO wrote him up for abnormal behavioral response under specific environmental conditions. He didn't argue. I stayed with the Scout Sniper Platoon, finished the remaining 4 months of the reset cycle, then deployed to Afghanistan for my final tour. Out in Helmand Province, in the desert nights, no fog, just dust and heat, I almost convinced myself that what I saw on March 14, 2012, was just my brain reacting to chemicals. Almost. Then I met Alan Crawford. Summer of 2014. I was out of the Corps, living in a coastal town in North County, San Diego, working part-time at a gun shop, cleaning, repairing rifles, doing occasional private instruction. It was a Wednesday afternoon. An old man walked in, 70s, short gray hair, faded Hawaiian shirt, Marine Corps ring on his left hand. He brought in an old Remington 700, wanted the barrel cleaned and the trigger tuned. I checked the markings out of habit. Stamped on the barrel, USMC property, M40, 1968. You a sniper? I asked. Used to be, he said. 68 to 70. 1st Marine Division. 1st Recon. We started talking. Conversations between veterans have their own rhythm. No small talk, no build-up. Straight to it. His name was Alan Crawford. 2 tours in Vietnam, Da Nang Hue Ki San. Rotated home late 69, out in early 70. Spent 30 years running an auto shop in Arizona. Retired to the California coast. We talked for about an hour. Deployments, gear, the kind of details only people who've been there understand. Then he asked, "You ever get stationed at Pendleton?" "Yeah," I said. "Most of my rotations after 2000. He nodded. Went quiet. Slow, careful hands working a cloth over the bolt assembly. "Northwest corner," he said without looking up. "Near Range Juliet. You ever been out there?" My fingers stopped on the trigger assembly. "Once or twice," I said. He set the bolt down and looked at me. His eyes were pale blue, faded with age. But in that moment, there was something in them that made my skin crawl. Not threat. Recognition. The look of one man confirming something in another. "You saw it too," he said. Not a question. A statement. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He looked away, went back to cleaning the bolt. His voice dropped low enough I had to lean in to hear. "November 1969. I'd been back from Vietnam less than 6 weeks. We got orders to run a night security detail around the perimeter of X-17. No explanation. Just sensitive materials in the area. 1 platoon spread out along the fence line, 50-yard intervals. From 1800 to 0600. First few hours, nothing happened. Weather was just like you described, fog rolling in from the ocean, thick as cotton. Moon completely blocked out." He flipped the bolt assembly over and wiped the other side with a fresh cloth. "About 0200, he said. "One of the guys north of my position, McAllister, comes up on the radio. Not a normal report. Weird. Like he's trying to talk but his mouth won't cooperate. Platoon leader asks what's going on. Takes him a while, but he finally gets out. There's something inside the fence looking at me." Crawford paused. The lieutenant tells him to confirm. McAllister says he can't, because it doesn't have a face. The shop was quiet. The hum of the AC. A car passing somewhere out on the road. The soft rustle of the owner turning pages behind the counter. All of it suddenly felt distant, like there was something invisible between me and the rest of the world. "Then the radios went dead," Crawford said. "All of them. At the same time. Not interference. Not malfunction. Dead. PRC-25 speakers, nothing. No static, no background noise. That's not how radios work. Even with no signal, you get something. This was absolute. Like the entire electromagnetic spectrum just got erased." He set the cloth down and began reassembling the bolt, slow and deliberate. That silence lasted about 3 minutes. Then we all heard it. He didn't look up. Not over the radio. In the air. Low-frequency hum. So low you feel it in your ribs. Then the smell. I can't describe it, but 40 years later, I can still smell it. Some nights I wake up thinking it's in the room. My fingers were still resting on the trigger assembly. My forehead started to ache. "And then?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. Then it stopped. Hum gone. Smell gone. Radio's back. We did a head count. Everyone was there, except McAllister. "He disappeared?" "No," Crawford said. "He didn't disappear. He was right there at his post. Eyes open. Rifle in his hands. Safety off. Muzzle pointed at the fence. He finally looked at me. But he couldn't speak anymore. Not injured. Not shock. Not anything you'd call a combat reaction. He just couldn't speak. His vocal cords worked. Tongue, lips, everything intact. Doctors checked him top to bottom. Nothing wrong. He could understand you. Could write. Could nod or shake his head. But no sound. Like something took it. Crawford wiped the remaining oil off his hands against his pant leg and set the rifle aside. We were reassigned within 72 hours. I got sent to 29 Palms, then processed out. I looked into McAllister later. He was sent to Bethesda Naval Hospital. Stayed 6 months. Discharged medical. Diagnosis: acute aphasia, unknown origin. He paused. I tried to reach him. Letters. Calls. Nothing. In 71, I saw his obituary. Suicide. Shot himself at home in Arizona. Said he'd been struggling with wartime trauma from Vietnam. Crawford shook his head slightly. But I knew it wasn't Vietnam. He stood, pulled a $20 bill from his pocket, and set it on the counter. Trigger to 3.5 pounds. Barrel's fine. Just run some Hoppa's number 9 through it. I took the money and handed him the rifle. He turned toward the door, took a couple of steps, then stopped. Tilted his head slightly, not looking back. You asked what happened after, he said. Now I'll tell you. He still didn't turn. 45 years. Every night before I go to sleep, I lock my bedroom door. Not the front door, the bedroom door. My wife thinks I'm crazy. I tell her it's a habit from the Corps. It's not. I lock it because I know, if that hum ever comes back, if that smell shows up in my room, a locked door won't stop it. But I'll know it's there. For those few seconds, I'll know. He pushed the door open. The bell chimed. Summer sunlight spilled across the concrete floor. I sat there for a long time without moving. After General Scott's case was officially marked, presumed dead, in 1973, standard military procedure would have transferred the file to the National Archives in 1978, 11 years after the disappearance, for permanent storage. It never showed up. In 1992, a civilian records clerk named Judith Ramirez found that Scott's file folder contained nothing but a blank index card. Written on it in pencil were 2 words. Withdrawn. She reported it. 3 days later, she was reassigned, moved from St. Louis to Arlington, Virginia. Her first performance review in the new position labeled her uncooperative. She was laid off in a 1993 Department of Defense reduction. In 1997, she gave an interview to a reporter from the San Diego Union Tribune. It was never published. The reporter called her the day before it was supposed to run and said his editor killed the story. Insufficient verifiable sources. Ramirez later wrote in a private email, he sounded like he wanted to tell me something, but something was stopping him. In 2004, a nonprofit called the Aviation History Declassification Project filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all non-classified documents related to Scott's disappearance. The Navy responded. 3 pages. Page 1, Scott's service record. Page 2, his commendations. Page 3, a memo dated February 21, 1967. In it, General Scott requested an extension of special security measures in the X-17 area, citing a 340% increase in observed atmospheric optical phenomena over the past 6 weeks. Current protocols are insufficient to ensure the psychological stability of exposed personnel. The rest of the memo was redacted. Not poorly, completely. Solid black bars. Perfect spacing. Machine precision. Nothing bleeding through. In the lower right corner, there had been a handwritten note. 6 words. Handwriting matched Scott's signature from other documents. They won't let me say. The nonprofit uploaded the memo to their website. 2 weeks later, the site suffered a technical failure. Database corrupted. Backups lost. Files had to be re-uploaded. The memo came back. The handwritten note didn't. The project director swore he hadn't altered anything. Said the original scan was still on his hard drive. When he opened it, the note was gone. Clean. Like it had never been there. All of this, I pieced together after I got out. Sleepless nights, chasing fragments. Each piece like a shard of glass washed ashore, edges worn smooth, but still clear, still catching light. I laid them out, tried to form something whole. Every time, it looked different. Sometimes like a face. Sometimes like a door. Sometimes like nothing at all. Just broken glass. I think about that night at Range Juliet. What would have happened if we'd stayed? If Groves hadn't ordered the withdrawal? If we'd stood there and let those things close the distance? From 450 yards, to 200, to 100, to arm's reach. Would we have seen more detail? Or do they not have detail at all? That arm it raised, pointing toward X-17. What was it? A warning? An invitation? Or a marker? I checked the maps. From the firing line at Range Juliet to the X-17 fence, about 1,000 yards. What's behind that fence? I never got a straight answer. People said different things. An abandoned hangar with a Cold War aircraft. A disposal site for low-level nuclear waste. Nothing at all, just empty land tied up in legal disputes. But one person, an old civilian who'd worked base logistics for 30 years, told me something else. We were in the parking lot outside the PX. I was loading a case of bottled water into my truck. He walked by with a cart. I don't even remember how we started talking. I made some comment about poor signage in the northwest sector. He said, "Some places out there aren't meant to be found." I stopped and looked at him. Mid-60s. Thick glasses. Worn plaid shirt. 2 pens in the pocket. The kind of face you get after decades in a bureaucratic system. Tired, polished smooth, worn down by rules and procedures. And empty in a way that didn't feel natural. In 1967, in California, at Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, Brigadier General Robert R. Scott, a senior officer in Marine Corps Aviation and Chief of Staff of the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, vanished from his office on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday night. Not killed in action. Not reassigned. Not retired. Vanished. His uniform was still hanging on the rack. His briefcase was still sitting on top of the 3rd drawer on the right side of his desk, containing an unsigned sitrep about an unauthorized aerial contact incident that had occurred 4 days earlier over the 29 Palms training area. There was still half a cup of cold black liquid in his coffee mug, a faint brown ring of residue clinging to the inside. His staff car, a military green Plymouth, was parked in the headquarters lot, engine cold, gas tank full, keys still in the ignition. The MPs found the car at 3:40 a.m. the next morning during a routine patrol. One window was half open, and on the front seat sat an open pack of Lucky Strikes and a lighter. Everyone on base who had ever attended a meeting with Scott knew he smoked Luckies. The lighter was a brass Zippo, heavily worn, engraved with the designation of the flight squadron he had served in during the Korean War. No one saw him leave. There were no witnesses, no surveillance footage. The base's security system, at the time, consisted of patrols and sign-in logs. His wife called the duty office at 7 o'clock the next morning because he hadn't called her by 10 p.m. the night before, as he always did. It was their routine, 19 years without a break. Scott was a man of near-obsessive punctuality. His subordinates privately called him the timetable colonel, even after he made general. He was never late, never absent, never broke a rule he set for himself. Naval Investigative Service agents arrived at Pendleton 3 days later. They tore through his office, quarters, personal correspondence, phone records, and every mission file from the previous 6 months. They interviewed more than 200 officers and enlisted personnel. Most of them gave eerily identical answers. "I don't know, sir. Everything was normal that night, sir. I didn't notice anything unusual, sir." Only one man, Private Miller, mentioned something different. He said that on the night of the 17th, the night Scott disappeared, at around 11:40 p.m., he saw the general's staff car near the maintenance corridor on the east side of the base. Miller had been on rear area patrol. He said the car was parked at the end of the corridor near an old hangar, headlights off, but with a silhouette inside. He assumed the general was waiting for someone or reviewing paperwork, so he didn't approach. That was his exact statement, recorded in interview report number 47. That report was later removed from the file, just like Scott. 6 weeks later, the case was officially filed as unauthorized absence, then downgraded to missing, and finally, in 1973 marked presumed deceased. But that's not what I'm here to talk about tonight. I'm here to talk about what Scott was doing before he disappeared, and what we saw afterward in that goddamn range. My name is Harper. I served in the Marine Corps from 1987 to 2011. Gunnery Sergeant. Most of my time was with a reconnaissance sniper platoon. I was in Operation Desert Storm. Did 2 rotations in Fallujah. I've still got 3 pieces of Iraqi shrapnel in my knee, and when the weather turns, it feels like someone's twisting a screwdriver inside the joint. I've seen things that don't make sense. Some of them were done by people. Some of them weren't. But what happened in the northwest corner of Pendleton in the spring of 2012, it took me 8 years to convince myself to talk about it. Not because I'm afraid people will think I'm crazy. I spent 24 years in the Marine Corps. No one says that to my face. It's because I'm afraid that if I say it out loud, something might realize I still remember. It was March 14, 2012. We had just rotated back from Afghanistan and were stationed at Pendleton for a 6-month reset and retraining cycle. The base covers over 125,000 acres, stretching from the coastline of San Diego County deep into the Santa Ana Mountains. It's the largest Marine Corps base in the continental U.S., and the kind of terrain where you can get lost 3 times in a single day. On the coastal side, fog-choked flats and scrub-covered cliffs. Inland, burned hills and dry riverbeds. Deep in the mountains, vast undeveloped zones designated for live fire ranges and maneuver training. Some areas on the map were marked restricted access, division-level authorization required. I'd been into those areas twice. Both times I felt something I couldn't quite name. Not fear, more like that tightness in your skin when you walk into a long-abandoned house. That afternoon, the weather was bad. Marine fog had rolled in about 6 miles inland, wrapping the western half of the base in thick gray vapor. Visibility was under 200 yards in most places, under 50 in the low ground. Temperature around 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity close to 100%. The air smelled like salt, rotting kelp, sagebrush, and dust, an odd mix that made your nose itch. We were assigned a night live fire exercise. Simple on paper, squad-level night qualification at the Juliet Range in the northwest corner of the base. M40A5 bolt-action rifles and M110 semi-auto sniper systems. Targets at 400, 600, and 800 yards. Standard Marine Corps sniper qualification. The only thing unusual was the location. Juliet sat right next to the most remote restricted zone on the base. On the map, it didn't have a name, just a designation, X-17. According to official documentation, X-17 was an abandoned aviation weapons testing site, supposedly used in the 1960s for airborne weapons systems before being decommissioned. Sounded reasonable. Pendleton is full of abandoned Cold War infrastructure. But there was one detail I never forgot. The warning signs on the perimeter fence weren't standard, military area, signage. They were red, and below the usual warning text was a line in small print. Restricted under authority of the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, Section 142. Atomic Energy Act. Which meant nuclear materials had been involved. I'm not a physicist. Not intel. Just a Marine who knows when to shut up and when to pay attention. We didn't expect anything unusual that night. Night shooting quals are routine, especially during reset cycles. Command needs to keep Marines busy. Our platoon commander was Lieutenant Groves, a tall, lean guy from Missouri, slow southern drawl, 2 Iraq deployments. Calm to the point of seeming dull, but every decision he made in combat was right. I was the platoon sergeant. 12 snipers total, split into 4 fire teams. That night, Team 1, Team 2, Groves, me, and a comms guy named Sanchez. 9 of us. At 17:30, we drew weapons and ammo. I carried an M40A5, Remington 700 Action, Schmidt and Bender Optic. 308. Same rifle setup I'd been running for 7 years. The cheek pad was worn in with sweat and oil from my face. Each man got 40 rounds of live ammo, plus 2 mags of night optic calibration rounds. Sanchez carried an N/PSC-5 satellite terminal and 2 PRC-117F radios. Night vision, PVS-14 monoculars, plus and/PVS-22 clip-on sights. For a training exercise it was solid gear. We rolled out at 1,802 7-ton trucks, heading northwest along gravel roads. The fog got thicker. Headlights turned into solid white walls. Visibility dropped to 30 yards. Driver was Private First Class Keller, a kid from Wisconsin, clean-shaven, chewing gum nonstop. He slowed the truck and hugged the centerline. Inside the cab, it was quiet. Not discipline, instinct. Anyone who's driven enough roads in Iraq or Afghanistan learns to stay quiet. You watch, you listen. Talking feels wrong. After 40 minutes, we reached Juliet Range. Open valley. Low ridge to the north. Sloping terrain and scrub to the south. Targets were already set. Steel silhouettes at 400 and 600. A 1-meter square plate at 800. Everything. Standard. Except one thing. Behind the 800-yard target, another 200 yards out, was the X-17 perimeter fence. I scanned the range through my spotting scope. 400-yard target, clear. 600, slightly blurred by fog. 800, almost completely swallowed, just a faint reflective glow. But what caught my attention wasn't the targets. It was the fog beyond the fence. It was moving, not with the wind. The wind that night was blowing west to east, from the ocean inland. But the fog on the other side of the fence was rolling east to west, like something inside was stirring it. I dismissed it as terrain-induced airflow. We set up. At 19:20, the first round was fired. That's where this part begins. But before I go on, there's something you need to understand. About fog. about what we saw in it, and about how thin reality actually is. In 24 years in the Marine Corps, I've been all over the world. I've seen oil fire clouds over the Persian Gulf, black blue skies over the Hindu Kush, jungle mist in the Philippines rising off rotting vegetation. And sometimes, at dawn, or dusk, under the right light, you feel it. The world under your feet is thinner than it should be. Not metaphorically, literally, like a stretched sheet of plastic wrap. You press down, and something presses back from the other side. You can't see it, don't know its shape, its intent, but you feel it. A pressure, not wind, not temperature. Something older than language telling you, this side is ours, that side isn't. Most people never feel it. They're too busy. Mortgage, work, dinner, kids, oil change. But put someone somewhere remote enough, quiet enough, old enough, and that light dims, and they start to notice things. Things in the corner of their eye, sounds at the edge of hearing, a sensation on the skin that's either hot nor cold. Military operations take you to those places. Ranges, training zones, forward bases, the edges of civilization. Stay there long enough, you start noticing things you shouldn't. You see movement in NVGs that doesn't make sense. Hear signals in radio silence. Smell things in the dark that don't belong to anything living. And then you tell yourself it's nothing. Because if you don't, you have to consider something else. That something is watching you back. The first time I felt that was 1989, Panama. Through a PVS-4 scope, I saw a heat signature at 300 yards. Not human, not animal, perfectly uniform, like a vertical cylinder of constant temperature. It stayed there 40 seconds. Then it moved. Not walked. Not ran. Moved. From one position to another with no transition. I looked with the naked eye. Nothing. Back through NVG. It was gone. The next morning I told my squad leader, Vietnam vet. He listened, then said, "Harper, some things you see, you keep to yourself. Command doesn't want to hear about something that moves without following physics. They want 4 armed individuals moving north. You understand?" I did, and I learned to keep my mouth shut. 23 years later, at Juliet Range, I remembered those words. The room fell quiet again. The palm fronds still rustled, the waves still broke against the shore, and somewhere down a distant street a car passed, the sound of its tires rising and fading along the pavement. All of it was there, clear, normal, carrying nothing unusual. I pulled my hand out of the drawer without taking the gun. I lay back down. The strip of moonlight on the ceiling had shifted slightly. I stared at it, thinking about what Groves had written, asterisk. From 74 yards, continuing forward until it stands in front of you. Asterisk, it didn't stand in front of me. Not tonight. But I know it's somewhere. In the northwest corner of Camp Pendleton, in Zone X-17, above the ridgeline north of the Juliet Range, at that height where the fog is thickest, behind that gray-white curtain where moonlight can't reach. It's there, standing, or hovering, or existing in some physical state I don't understand, facing in our direction. Not just our firing position, that was 2012. Facing everyone who has ever seen it. Facing Crawford. Facing McAllister. Facing Brigadier General Scott. Facing Groves. Facing me. What is it waiting for? I don't know. What is it pointing at? X-17. That circular steel hatch set into the center of the hangar floor. Whatever is beneath it, pulsing at 40 beats per minute. That number stamped by the Atomic Energy Commission in 1956. It's pointing at the place we were never meant to enter, pointing at the other side of the membrane. My forehead still aches, faint, persistent, like a wound that never fully heals, reminding me it's there. Outside, the fog was thickening. It rolled in from the coast, spilling over the palm trees, filling the gaps between houses and streets, wrapping the entire neighborhood in a damp gray blanket. I watched it through the crack in the curtain, watched it blur the streetlights into dull orange halos, watched it swallow the outline of the house across the street. And just before it erased everything, before the last trace of moonlight disappeared, I saw something. Across the street, beside the palm tree, about 74 yards away, a silhouette. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, there was nothing outside but a uniform, featureless gray. I don't know if that was my mind breaking under exhaustion, or something else. I don't know if the 74 yards in Groves' letter was coincidence, or something inevitable I can't comprehend. I don't know if that silhouette was there to warn me, to confirm I still remember, or if it simply existed at that place and time with no regard for me at all. I only know one thing. Tomorrow night I'll lock my bedroom door. Just like Crawford. Just like Groves. Just like McAllister did every night before he ended his life. Not because a locked door can stop it, but because in that moment, when the bolt slides into place, metal against metal, you can tell yourself, asterisk not tonight. Asterisk you can buy yourself another day. Another day to pretend the world is what you thought it was. That the space between the stars is empty, safe. That the uniform heat signature in your scope was just a deer that wandered too far. That the shape in the fog was just light and imagination conspiring against you. That your forehead never hurt. That the smell in the middle of the night was just ocean mist and exhaust drifting in through the window. You can pretend for a lifetime, but you know it isn't true. You know there's something on the other side of the membrane, and it knows that you know. On the last page of Brigadier General Scott's February 21, 1967 memorandum, on the final line beneath all the redacted text, there was a sentence left untouched. Maybe whoever blacked it out thought it was too vague to matter. Or maybe they hesitated at the last second. The sentence read, "They're not from somewhere else. They've always been here. We've just learned how to see them." 23 days after writing that, Scott disappeared from his office. His uniform still on the rack. His briefcase still in the drawer. Half a cup of cold coffee on his desk. His car in the lot, engine cold, tank full, keys in the ignition. An open pack of Lucky Strikes and a Zippo lighter on the seat. No one saw him leave. But Private Miller, the same one who reported seeing the general's car in interview report number 47, told his roommate something else before he was transferred out of Pendleton. It was never recorded in any official file, but it's been passed around the base for decades. Miller said he saw more than just the car that night. He saw the general. Scott was standing outside the vehicle, facing the hangar, completely still. Miller was about to approach when he noticed something else. About 10 feet in front of the general, in the shadow of the hangar, another figure. A silhouette. Something shaped like a person, but not a person. No face. No color. Hovering inches above the ground. Miller said the silhouette raised one arm and pointed toward the hangar. Scott stood there, looking at it, for about 10 seconds. Then he nodded, and followed it into the shadow. Miller didn't chase him, didn't call out, didn't report it. He just stood there, watching the general's back disappear into the darkness until there was nothing left to see. Then he turned around, went back to his patrol route, and wrote, "All normal," on the log sheet. Later he said it wasn't fear that stopped him. It was a feeling that Scott hadn't been taken. He'd been picked up. Like someone who had been waiting a long time, and finally saw his ride arrive. Miller was transferred to Okinawa in April 1967. In February 1968, he lost 2 fingers in an ammunition handling accident. Medically discharged, he returned to Ohio, lived a quiet life, married, had children. He died in 2003 of lung cancer. Before he died, his wife asked if he had anything to say. He said, "The hangar door was open." She didn't understand. But we do. Those of us who have stood in the fog. Those of us who have seen things in night vision that shouldn't exist. Those of us who wake in the middle of the night to that low-frequency hum. Who smell that cold, burning metal scent. Who feel that dull ache in the center of the forehead. We understand. The hangar door is open. It always has been. Most of the time, we just pretend we can't see it. Because seeing it means facing a question we're not ready to answer. When that silhouette appears in front of you, when it raises that jointless arm, when it points somewhere you've never been, but have always been heading toward, will you nod?